Yes, Sarah. How are
Hi,
you?
Ron. Now I can hear you.
That's good. Yeah, Sarah. Anyways, I've been searching and searching and searching, and I can't find anything anywhere using the information that's in the Election Act and the Municipal Act that would give any credence to the idea that this election is legal or lawful. This last election that just took place, and I really need somebody from your end to show why this municipal election is legal, because all definitions that I can find for the act, or the two acts, the Election Act and the Municipal Act, and take the definitions from the Municipal Act and move them over to the Election Act, it negates everybody on the voters list from voting, because it puts everybody on the voters list in the position of being a corporate entity, and corporations can't vote. And I need somebody from your end to qualify why this is a legal, lawful election process.
So, Mr. Stevens, you've asked that question, I know now, many times.
And I'm still waiting for an answer. And somebody from your end, the onus is not on me. I didn't call the election. I didn't do anything by the Election Act or the Municipal Act. I didn't do anything. You guys did.
Well, actually...
And you guys are in charge of it, correct?
May I clarify my role? So I'm
okay.
a citizen. So what I do is, provide policy to government, but it's up to governments to implement the laws through the legislature, which is why I can't give you advice about a piece of legislation that the House has decided to pass. Once it's law, once it becomes a statute, it's a piece of law. So interpreting what a law says in the way that you're asking really requires a lawyer and the courts to make a determination. And we do get lots of questions about whether something is lawful. I want to be clear that in saying that we can't provide that kind of interpretation to you, it's not because we're denying you a service to you as an individual, because your question is complex. The ministry doesn't do that at any point. Municipalities are their own governments. They implement the provincial legislation that applies to them, and the clerk runs the election according to that provincial legislation, and municipalities work with their lawyers to figure out what that legislation says. And there's a process through the courts where if somebody doesn't feel that something is lawful, and the courts agree with that case, that they can strike something from provincial legislation or strike down provincial legislation as being unlawful. It could violate a constitutional right, or it could, you're probing the idea of whether it makes sense at all.
Well, it doesn't make any sense by your own rules and regulations, but you're saying that the province, the House, as you describe it, creates this legislation which becomes a statute, which becomes law, and then it's up to the municipal government to decide how it's going to act on it.
In some ways, it's prescriptive. The legislation.
But where does Affairs and Housing become involved in this?
Well, when that legislation was developed, we would have been responsible for providing the government with advice on what it was going to look like and what kind of policy objectives it might include. We would work with our legal staff to figure out how to actually write the rules and set out the provisions that give municipalities flexibility to do certain things. For example, some things are set up and are restrictive, like everybody who runs has to follow the same campaign finance rules. Some things are left to the municipality. You know, a municipality can pass a bylaw deciding whether or not they want to use internet voting in their community, and some things are left to the clerk. So the clerk decides how many polling stations to have, for example. Every time, you know, we've told you before that we do review the act after every municipal election. So my job would be to talk to the government about what we've been hearing from our stakeholders and from municipalities and from clerks and from citizens about the act, and see if they're interested in taking a look at those things. We also respond to the government who says, for example, in their mandate letter to us, we want to provide the people of Ontario with the option of doing ranked ballot voting. So, you know, we get direction to provide policy advice to them on how that would happen in Ontario.
Policy advice to who?
To our minister's office, who in turn makes decisions with their caucus, and then whatever they bring before the government about the actual. And I don't actually. My job does not involve. You know, any of the decision making about the legislation.
No, but I hear.
Or not it.
If I'm and please, I find this absolutely fascinating, Sarah. But the way you're describing what you're describing here, you seem to be putting municipal affairs and housing in a position of policy advisor or advocate.
Advisor. We're as civil servants. Our job is to provide neutral advice to the government.
Okay, and then they act on that advice, and then they create their statute, election rules and regulations, law, whatever you want to call it. So they're acting actually on the advice of municipal affairs and housing on how to construct the acts, the municipal act and the municipal election act. They're acting on advice from your ministry.
Yeah, well, I mean, as civil servants, you hope so. You hope that your advice, if it's well-informed, has an impact on the government's decision-making, but it's a very separate part of the way government works. We are not privy to political decisions. We're not privy that the decisions that are made by an individual government about what they want to champion and take forward and what kind of policies they want to take to the House are completely separate from the civil service process, and we have no control over whether policies. You know, as a policymaker, you do often work on things and then direction changes and it ends up back on a shelf. So
but what I'm trying to understand here, Sarah, is because you guys, and you do have your own lawyers there in the policy part of this, policy lawyers, I guess you would call them, that you would think between your ministry and your policy lawyers or your staff lawyers would have no problem going through the Election Act and the Municipal Act and looking at the two acts and be able to give me a definitive answer to my questions.
But we don't do that, sir. So you're asking us to...
You don't do it.
No, we don't. And that would be consistent for anything you asked us where you're asking us to interpret why the act is the way it is. That's something that the legislature decided. So
yes, but the legislature cannot. That you cannot legislate fraud into law. You can't do that. Okay.
What you're doing is challenging the validity of the act, and that's something that a court.
Well, no, the act. Not I. I am not challenging the validity of the act, sir. The act is challenging the validity of the act. The very wording of the act challenges the act.
Ron,
okay? That's the difference. I'm not challenging anything. I am just simply looking at the written rules and regulations of the two acts. Okay? And when you read those, it negates any idea of a lawful election process. That's the Act's words that say it, not me. I'm not looking for anything. I'm not trying to cause anybody trouble. That's not the position here. The position is that we have a problem, and it is not up to me to solve the problem. I didn't create the problem. Now, if there is no problem, then you would think someone from either your position or your ministry's position, the lawyers' positions, the government's positions, would all have gotten together by now and said, geez, we better look at this, because not to do so is basically a breach of duty, by for sure, that if there's a question about this, then it needs to get looked at. You can't just say, oh, well, we're good with it, we'll just drive on. This is a very legitimate question that has been brought forward, and it has to be dealt with. And it's not up to me to deal with it. It's not up to me to challenge it. It's up to the people that wrote it, who passed it, who are engaged in it, to make sure that this is all legitimate. You know, that's all I'm asking is give me some legitimacy.
Could you give me a sec first here? So
yeah.
There's several things I would say. So one is that we review the Act after every election to make sure it's fair and effective and doing the job that it needs to do to make sure people have confidence in local elections and in their local government.
Well, having false confidence is not confidence.
Well, sir, let me finish. So I want to tell you that we keep a very comprehensive record of the views that we hear from you or any other group or individual in the province. We make sure that our minister's office is aware of the nature of people's concerns. We provide analysis on that analysis on individuals' advice to us. So while I can't tell you whether or not the Act is valid, I can't give you an opinion on that because...
But we just had an election, and it's your ministry that's in charge of it, and yet you can't
I can give you legal advice. I can take your comments forward to the people who make decisions, and we've already told you.
But you can't confirm whether or not it's a valid election. You just said that.
No, I can't tell. You're asking me to confirm whether or not the Act is legally sound, and that is not something that policy advisors do. That is something that lawyers and the courts argue between each other.
But it was the lawyers from your ministry, and it was the lawyers from the legislative lawyers. I mean, most of the guys who are in cabinet are lawyers. These are all trained lawyers. They are the ones that, with your advice, not your particular advice, but the advice from people in your ministry, got together and put these acts together. Now, so we are relying on lawyers who put this thing together and turned it into a statute, a law, and to benefit whom, I'm not sure. But we are supposed to just rely on something a bunch of lawyers concocted and accept the fact that, well, they're lawyers, they put it together, so it must be legitimate. That's no good.
No,
okay? That's absolutely no good. When we are told that corporations cannot vote, and everything in the pertaining to this particular question, in the Municipal Act, says that everyone in the municipality is a corporate entity. Now, that means that everyone on the voters list is a corporate entity, and corporations cannot vote. Now, if somehow the people who are on the voters list, this is what I'm trying to figure out. The people on the voters list are obviously corporate entities. That's a given. I don't think anybody's going to quibble about